Today I am building this 3-way vintage style loudspeaker with punktkielde and Foundtech drivers. With the increasing popularity lately of the vintage style large box format loudspeakers from manufacturers such as Wharfedale, KLH, PSB and others, I have set out to design and build my own version. It will be a typical 3-way design with a tweeter, 4-inch mid-range and 8-inch woofer. The dimensions are roughly 600mm high, 300mm wide and just short of 400mm deep. The mid-range and tweeter are offset from the center line on the baffle to counter any edge diffraction. However, I do have a protruding frame around the baffle, but this did not cause me too many issues during the crossover design. The mid-range driver has its own enclosure inside, and we have 2 braces to keep the cabinet as resonance free as possible. All panels are 18mm or 3/4 inch MDF. The mid-range enclosure also has these steps on the inside that is intended to break up any standing waves that might occur inside this small enclosure. The port is a slot that exits towards the back and is tuned to give a -3 dB response at 35 Hz. The frame around the baffle is solid keyhard wood and real wood veneer of the same to finish off the enclosure. I have also designed a stand that will put these off the floor at the right distance and at the right angle for the average listening position. I will of course be making build plans available for these on my website at soundblab.net, so stay tuned for more on that a little bit later. This build will be fairly high end, and by this I mean in terms of the quality of the drivers I will be using. Some time ago you might remember that I designed and built a 2-way stand mount speaker with punktkielde drivers. These drivers are manufactured by the same company that makes a very well engineered and considered high-end speaker driver product line. However, the punktkielde drivers are currently only available for purchase from one online supplier that I'm aware of, and this is Sound Imports in the Netherlands. The stock levels are limited, so if you want to build these, I would recommend that you first find out if the drivers are available in the quantities that you need. The woofer is a carbon pulp cone 8-inch woofer, and the mid-range the 4-inch version also with carbon pulp cone. Impedance for both is 4 ohms. These drivers are excellent quality, and Sound Imports do have them on very good specials at the moment. Links to these will be in the description below. For the tweeter, I went with a very popular Foundtech Neo CD 3.0M ribbon tweeter. It's available from Sound Speaker Store in the US and from a few European online stores, all which I will list in the description below. I start off the build by having marked out the positions of the drivers on the baffles, and then continue to use my router with a straight cut bit and circle cutting jig to cut the holes. I got the trim router and the circle cutting jig from Banggood.com, and both are excellent quality. The trim router fits Makita accessories and also uses the Makita 18V batteries. Purchase links are in the description below. The inside edge of the woofer and mid-range driver openings are then beveled with a 45-degree router bit to counter any reflections back onto the woofer cones. There are 2 braces inside the enclosure, and these are marked out and drilled with a 50mm Forstner bit, and then the cutouts are made with a jigsaw. One of the braces fit around the mid-range enclosure, and this is also marked out and pre-cut on the table saw, and then the remaining corner is cut out with the jigsaw. A final touch on the braces is to give the inside edges a slight bevel to aid airflow inside the cabinet, and perhaps also to assist with countering standing waves. The benefit of this is debatable though, but at least it looks nice. The mid-range enclosure consists of 4 small panels that are glued together. I also glued 4 smaller pieces to the inside to create steps in the back of the enclosure. This will hopefully help with breaking up any potential standing waves inside the small volume. Of course, both enclosure volumes will be lined with felt as damping material, but more on this later. Now I can cut the miters for the side and top and bottom panels on the table saw, but I'm having trouble to do this accurately on my table saw. I therefore devised a jig to use my small cordless Makita circular saw to cut these more accurately. So if you do not have a table saw, then a jig like this can give you very accurate results with minimal tools required. Now that the miters have been cut, I can cut the rebates for the front and rear panels on the table saw. But before the glue up of the main enclosure, I mark out where the port and brace panels must go. The side, top and bottom panels are then laid out and masking tape is used to secure the mitered edges to each other. I can then flip the assembly over, apply glue and bring it all together and use corner strap clamps to secure it until the glue dries. I also glue in the back panel to help the structure stay square. The next step is to glue the port, brace panels and mid-range enclosure in place. These panels are secured from the side with brad nails and a few clamps. An 18mm MDF spacer block is used to align the port equal distance away from the bottom panel. So I'm just having a little bit of a frustrating moment at the moment. After fixing the port in place, I continue to glue in the enclosure for the mid-range driver, plus the brace that surrounds that, and another brace that surrounds the woofer on the inside of the cabinet. But I repositioned the camera and then afterwards I never pressed record. So I assembled the entire inside of this enclosure. And I've got nothing to show for it, no recording whatsoever, so I apologize for that. But let me now just show you what I have actually done inside this enclosure. This is the port panel, so I still need to route a slot in the back so that we can have the port open to the outside, and then I have a brace on the inside here. This is where the large 8-inch woofer will be sitting, and then we have the mid-range enclosure and another brace that surrounds that. So you know, the cabinet will be quite well braced, and that should eliminate a lot of the resonances that we normally get with cabinets that don't have proper bracing in them. So there's another small mistake that I made. That is the baffle, which I've cut like a little bit too small, maybe about 2mm shorter on width and length, which is not the end of the world because I can just center it in the space and glue it on. I've got enough tolerance there to make this work, so that should be fine. I can glue that in place, and then we also have this beading or this solid wood profile that's going to go around the edge, so that will then also hide any gaps that I have there. Now I'm not going to glue the baffle on straight away because there's still some work that needs to be done inside the cabinet. For example, the mid-range enclosure must get damping material as well as the rest of the enclosure, and then I also need to cut the slot for the port, and I can do all of that before I glue the baffle on, and that just makes access to the enclosure so much more easy. Before gluing the baffle in place and to allow me better access, I drill a hole for the wire that goes to the mid-range driver. The mid-range enclosure is also lined with felt. I glue this in place with normal PVA wood glue. Next, I route to the port opening before continuing to glue the rest of the felt panels to the inside of the enclosure. The wire for the mid-range driver is fed through the hole and hot glue is used to make an airtight seal. Better would be to use silicone or even two-part epoxy, but if you use enough hot glue, it does a good job over time to seal the hole. Finally, the baffle can be glued in place and clamped until the glue is dry. The solid wood frame is 18 by 18mm strips that I cut on the table saw and also beveled one side. These are measured and then cut with 45-degree miters before gluing it in place over the baffle. But before gluing it down, I use a Japanese sumi ink to stain the MDF baffle a deep dark black. Once dry, the frame is glued in place with the aid of a few pieces of masking tape, off-cut wood pieces and clamps. To apply the veneer to the enclosure, I use contact adhesive. Both the veneer and the enclosure sides are coated. I wait 10 minutes and then carefully press the veneer in place and use a roller to press it down. A trim router is used to trim the excess edges on the veneer, and then I can continue with the next side until all surfaces have been covered with the veneer. I also use a trim router with a flush trim bit to cut the port opening through the veneer on the back panel. Before applying a finish, I sand the enclosure down with 240 grit sandpaper. Somehow I am not sure if I ever filmed the finish process, or perhaps I just lost the clip somehow, but for reference I used a Danish oil applied with a brush, let it soak for a few minutes and rubbed it off with clean cloth. This was done 3 times for a beautiful satin finish. Even though the crossover network is not the most complicated in the world, I did try quite a few iterations before settling on this one. More often than not, less complicated is better. We have a third order high pass on the tweeter, a second order high and low pass on the mid-range, and a second order on the bass driver. There are a few resistors in key places to bring all the drivers into level SPL range, and the coil in front of the tweeter circuit acts a bit like a notch filter to tame the upper frequencies of the tweeter above 5 kHz. The crossover components are all assembled on a 6mm MDF board with cable ties. You can also use some hot glue or construction adhesive to further secure them in place. I often do not do this in my builds since I like to continually tweak when I feel the need, and sometimes parts are used in other builds. On the back of the enclosure, just above the slot port, 2 holes are drilled to accommodate the binding posts. Here on my crossover board, you will see that I used a few capacitors in parallel to give me the values that I required, simply because I did not have the correct values in single capacitors at hand, but in the build plans I will obviously specify the single cap values and give links to each. The drivers are lined up and holes for mounting pre-drilled. I also include some more damping material in the top of the enclosure and behind the mid-range driver. I can then mount the tweeter and mid-range driver by soldering the wires to the speaker terminals. The tweeter has crimp terminals, but I did not show how this was connected, but here's an image that shows these screw-on crimp terminals. Before the base driver is installed, I can solder all the wires from the binding post and other drivers to the crossover board. The crossover is placed at the back on top of the port panel, and I used a strong 3mm thick double-sided tape for this. Finally, the base driver is screwed in place after soldering the wires to the speaker terminals, and we are done. Let's look at some of the performance graphs of the speaker. Impedance is a nominal 4 ohm and only dips below that briefly at 2.9 ohm between 1 and 2 kHz and should not be an issue for a 4 ohm rated amplifier. The frequency response is flat except for a rise on the tweeter after 5 kHz. However, when we look at the in-room response in the next graph, we see that it has flattened out and does not become audible. Also note that this graph does not include the port response, but the -3 dB point on the speaker is around 32 Hz and the in-room -3 response will be in the mid-20s. The directivity chart shows that we have good off-axis response all the way to 60 degrees across most of the frequency response. It only narrows slightly more at the very top end of the frequency range. If you want to build these for yourself, grab the build plans at my website at soundblab.net. However, I have to warn you that the Bunkielder drivers are only available at soundimport.eu and a limited supply. So please go check if these drivers are still available before purchasing the build plans or any other materials and parts. I will leave links to the drivers in the description below. Thank you all for watching. Remember to subscribe and give the video a thumbs up. Visit my Patreon and YouTube membership pages where I post behind the scene footage and where you can support me further. Until next time, adios. Let's take a listen to these awesome speakers. I recommend using good quality headphones.
Your little drama's got me mad, and I don't need to tell you facts. You know I always want you back, girl. I could give you a bigger surprise, let you take your time, sure you wanna treat me nice, and I'll save you a slice.
y el tiempo que no tenía, por errores que soñas, sino de noche de día, si no pregunta a tu almohada, por los gritos que escuchaban los vecinos. No te trago pero qué rico se vino, agua dulce baby puro manantial, nos comemos y se volvió personal. La baby no es Ben pero lo de 10, le quito el sostén, le quito el Cartier, un polvo en la estrella, muy en el cel, y si tiene gato no...
Something about you isn't right. I swear you can make me lose my mind. Lying here awake at night. If this is love, then I don't want it. Why you gotta be so complicated? I'm sick and tired of contemplating. I don't wanna be here waiting. If this is love, then I don't want it. I can't be the one you keep running to whenever you feel down. I can't be that someone who'll always be there when something's wrong.
The gentle April rain that stained the window panes last night is all but gone, but lingers on in scented clouds of air. We watch the town awaken to the